I used to think that loyalty guaranteed loyalty in return. That if you showed up for someone, day after day, they would show up for you. It's a naive idea, one I clung to far longer than I should have. Looking back, the signs were there. They were always there. It started small. Late nights at work that turned into excuses. A phone she kept turned face down, silenced, as if the sound of it ringing would betray her. Passwords I was suddenly no longer trusted to know. I told myself she was just stressed, just trying to find herself again. That marriages went through rough patches and good husbands held the line. So I held the line. I picked up extra chores around the house. I started cooking dinner more often, trying new recipes just to make her smile. I left notes in her car, little reminders that I loved her. I planned weekends away, trying to revive the closeness we had lost somewhere between work schedules and the everyday grind. She would thank me, hug me, but the hugs felt mechanical. Her eyes were always somewhere else, like she was already halfway gone. Still, I stayed hopeful. I told myself love was enough. That if I gave more, if I became better, she would find her way back to me. It was a Tuesday when the truth walked through my front door wearing another man's cologne. I wasn't supposed to be home. A meeting got cancelled last minute, so I swung by the house thinking I'd surprise her with lunch. I remember standing in the entryway, grocery bag in hand, when I heard voices, hers, light and playful, and his, low and familiar in a way that made my stomach twist before my brain even caught up. I moved down the hallway slowly, heart hammering. Every step closer stripped away a layer of denial I didn't realize I'd been wearing. They were sitting on our couch. The same couch where we had once fallen asleep watching movies, legs tangled, laughing at terrible rom-coms. She was curled up next to him, laughing at something he said, her body language soft and open in a way I hadn't seen from her in months. He spotted me first. No shame. No panic. Just a smirk that made my fists clench. She turned, saw me standing there, and for a split second, guilt flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. Defiance. "What are you doing home?" she asked, like I was the intruder. The man on the couch, her affair partner, I realized with a crushing clarity, put his arm around her shoulders, claiming her right there in front of me. My hands tightened around the grocery bag until it ripped, apples rolling across the hardwood floor. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat closed up, my body frozen between fight and flight. She stood crossing her arms. "I was going to tell you," she said, voice cold. "But you're never around. I need someone who makes me feel alive." The words hit harder than any slap. I looked at her, really looked. This was not the woman I married. Or maybe it was, and I just refused to see it. He leaned back, stretching out like he owned the place. "Nice house," he said casually. "Cozy." The casual cruelty of it made something inside me snap, not into rage, but into clarity. I wasn't going to fight for someone who had already left me in every way that mattered. I wasn't going to lower myself for a woman who could let another man disrespect me in my own home. I dropped the shredded grocery bag on the floor, turned without a word, and walked out. Each step away from that house felt heavier than the last, like shedding a skin I didn't know I was wearing. It would have been easier to scream, to throw something, to demand answers I already knew would be lies. But I didn't. I gave her the silence she deserved. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, the world blurring behind a film of unshed tears. Everything we had built, every memory, every promise, it all felt counterfeit now. A cheap magic trick designed to fall apart the second you looked too closely. Maybe the marriage had been dying for a long time. Maybe I was just the last one stubborn enough to pretend otherwise. When I finally started the engine, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even thinking about forgiveness. I was thinking about survival. About the man I used to be before love made me small. She had chosen her path. Now it was my turn to choose mine. The silence after betrayal is louder than any screaming match. It's a silence that seeps into your skin, into your bloodstream, until you wonder if you'll ever feel normal again. I didn't go back to the house after that day. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, crashing on his couch, pretending that sleeping under a thin blanket in a cold apartment wasn't a step down from the life I had built. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of what I'd lost. A cup of coffee left half-finished. A pair of running shoes by the door. Laughing couples at the park who had no idea how easily it could all fall apart. I didn't hate her, not yet. Hatred would have given me too much power. At that point, all I felt was hollow. The worst part wasn't losing her. It was losing the future I thought we were building. It was realizing that every memory we had made could be rewritten with a single truth: she had stopped choosing me long before that afternoon. I went through the motions. Woke up. Showered. Ate when I remembered. Smiled when people asked how I was doing, though the smile never reached my eyes. Some nights I would lie awake, replaying every conversation from the past year, searching for the moment when things changed. But the truth is, betrayal isn't always sudden. Sometimes it's slow, silent, growing like mold in the dark. I thought about calling her. About asking her why. About demanding closure, apologies, explanations. But then I realized something: closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you give yourself when you decide you deserve better. I booked a therapy session, half-heartedly at first. I sat there in a stiff chair, arms crossed, daring the therapist to fix me. Instead, she listened. When I finally cracked open and told her everything, she didn't offer easy answers. She didn't sugarcoat it. She said, "You didn't fail because you loved someone fully. You failed when you stopped loving yourself just to keep them." Those words stayed with me longer than anything my wife ever said. I started writing. Not poetry, not anything profound. Just pages and pages of anger, sadness, confusion. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words blurred into nonsense, until the hurt had somewhere to go other than my chest. One night, scrolling through a late-night forum for people going through divorce, I stumbled into a thread full of people who knew exactly how I felt. Strangers from all over the world bonded by heartbreak. They didn't offer clichés. They offered hard truths. They said healing wasn't linear. That some days you would wake up feeling almost okay, and others you would want to tear your own skin off just to stop feeling so much. Reading their stories made me feel less alone. Less like a failure. More like someone who had survived something brutal, and could survive it again tomorrow if he had to. I stopped drinking. Started running again, pounding my frustration into the pavement. I deleted the photos on my phone, one by one. Our wedding. Our vacations. Our inside jokes captured in blurry images. Every deletion felt like pulling out a thorn. I rented a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Just mine. A place untouched by her laughter, her perfume, her lies. I painted the walls myself. As the fresh paint dried, it felt like sealing off the past, one coat at a time. People asked if I hated her. If I planned to get revenge. I told them the truth: she wasn't worth hating. Hate takes energy, energy I needed to rebuild myself. I didn't want her back. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I wanted peace. I wanted to look in the mirror and not see a man betrayed, but a man reborn. The divorce paperwork came through faster than I expected. She didn't fight me on anything. Maybe guilt pushed her to make it easy. Maybe indifference. Either way, I signed the papers with a hand that barely trembled. There was no grand farewell. No final confrontation. No dramatic apology at the 11th hour. Just a few signatures and a quiet ending to something that once promised forever. People talk about heartbreak like it's a singular event, a moment that shatters you. They don't tell you about the long ache afterward, the slow realization that you have to rebuild your life from the ashes without knowing what the new shape will look like. But as painful as it was also liberating. I wasn't tied down anymore to someone who saw me as an option. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's half-hearted love. I was free. I started setting boundaries, not just with women, but with everyone. I stopped bending over backward to be liked. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I learned to sit with my own company and not mistake loneliness for failure. There were nights I still ached. Nights when the bed felt too big and the future too uncertain. But those nights became fewer and farther between. Healing didn't happen in a straight line. It happened in spirals, in stumbles, in moments where I realized I had gone a whole hour, then a whole day, without thinking about her. The man who had walked out of that house broken didn't exist anymore. Someone stronger was taking his place. Months passed, but the memory of what happened stopped haunting every corner of my mind. Life didn't magically fix itself. It rebuilt slowly, stubbornly, like a tree growing through concrete. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't interested in distractions or empty promises. I had learned the hard way what happens when you settle for being seen only halfway. It was an ordinary day when I met her. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't dressed to impress. No grand gestures, no witty lines. Just two people reaching for the same worn-out book at a local bookstore. She smiled and offered it to me. I almost declined out of habit, used to keeping everyone at arm's length. But something in her eyes was different. They weren't searching for anything to take. They weren't calculating what they could get. They were just kind. Her name was Elena. She didn't ask intrusive questions. She didn't poke at wounds I was still nursing. We talked about books, about coffee, about music, about nothing important and everything important at once. She didn't try to fill my silences with noise. She let me have them. Let me be quiet without making it awkward. I left that bookstore feeling something I hadn't felt in months, curiosity. Not about her, but about myself. About the man I might still be underneath all the wreckage. We started meeting up, casually at first. No pressure. No expectations. Just two people who found comfort in each other's company. With her, there was no performance, no tightrope walk to stay good enough. I didn't have to prove my worth every second. I just had to show up as I was. I told her about the divorce, eventually. She didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She just listened, really listened, like what I said mattered. When I talked about my mistakes, about ignoring red flags, about giving too much for too little, she didn't excuse them or minimize them. She just said, "We're all learning. As long as we don't stop, that's what matters." There were no grand declarations of love. No whirlwind romance. It was slow, steady, real. We built something based on truth, not on what we wished the other person could be. One night, months into knowing her, she looked at me and said, "You know you don't have to be perfect to be loved, right?" It hit harder than anything my ex-wife had ever said. Harder than the betrayal. Because it touched a part of me that had always believed I had to earn love by sacrificing pieces of myself. With Elena, there were no negotiations over my worth. No silent punishments. No guilt-tripping games. Just a quiet understanding that love isn't supposed to feel like a test you're always failing. I saw my own reflection differently because of her. I started recognizing the strength it took to walk away from what was breaking me. The courage it took to start over when everything inside me screamed to hold on to the familiar, even if it was toxic. It wasn't about replacing my ex-wife. It wasn't about proving anything to her or anyone else. It was about finding parts of myself I had buried under years of trying to be enough for someone who never really saw me. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I was becoming. Not because Elena needed me to be someone new, but because she reminded me that I already was. We didn't rush things. We didn't move in together after a month or make reckless promises. We let it breathe. We gave it space to be whatever it needed to be. Some days we laughed until our ribs hurt. Some days we sat quietly, just being there. Both mattered. Both were real. It took me a while to realize I loved her. Not the desperate, clinging kind of love I once thought was romantic, but a steady, grounded love. The kind that doesn't make you question your worth or wonder if today will be the day they decide you're too much. I didn't need her to heal. I had already started that work on my own. But she made the process less lonely. She made me believe that love could be healthy, honest, and brave. The best part? She never tried to make me forget the past. She respected that my scars existed. She just didn't treat them like something that made me less deserving of happiness. Some nights, I would look at her across a table, laughing at some terrible joke I made, and feel a peace I didn't know I could have again. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're finally safe to just be yourself. I had lost so much. Time, trust, pieces of my heart I would never get back. But in losing all of that, I gained something more important: the understanding that loving the wrong person doesn't make you unworthy of being loved by the right one. I didn't need to make my ex-wife jealous. I didn't need to prove anything. I had already won the moment I chose myself over staying broken for someone else's comfort. Meeting Elena didn't fix everything. But it reminded me that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. And sometimes the love that saves you is the one you build after you finally stop settling for less. 6 months after I moved out, I got a text from her. Just a simple, "Hey. Hope you're doing okay." No explanation. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. It would have been easy to ignore, but curiosity got the better of me. I didn't reply right away. I sat with the message, wondering what she wanted. That's the thing about people who betray you, they often come back when they see you've moved on without them. A few days later, I responded with a short, "Doing fine. Hope you are too." That was it. Nothing more. I didn't need to pour salt into old wounds or open the door to conversations I no longer needed. She replied almost immediately. That told me everything. She asked to meet for coffee. Said she just wanted to talk. I debated it. Not because I missed her. I didn't. But because a part of me needed to look her in the eye, not out of revenge, but out of closure. This time, I would walk in without any hope, any need for her validation. I just wanted to face the final remnants of a chapter I'd already closed internally. She looked different when I saw her again. Not physically. Emotionally. There was a heaviness to her she hadn't carried before, and for once, I wasn't the one feeling smaller in the room. She asked how I'd been. I told her truthfully, work was going well, I'd found a routine, and yes, I was seeing someone. I didn't brag. I didn't try to make her jealous. I simply told the truth, and that truth hit harder than any cold shoulder could. She told me things had ended with him a few weeks after I left. He wasn't who she thought he was. He didn't want anything serious. He ghosted her after a fight. No apology. No closure. I could see in her eyes she wasn't telling me this for my sympathy. She was telling me because she didn't know who else would understand the humiliation. But I wasn't angry anymore. I listened calmly, silently, while she admitted she had made a mistake. Said she thought the excitement would last, that I had become too steady. Like being reliable was some kind of flaw. Said she didn't realize what she had until it was too late. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't remind her that I had been the one who stayed loyal, who tried, who believed in us when she was already entertaining someone else behind my back. Instead, I said something she didn't expect. "I hope you find peace." That was it. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just peace. Because I finally had mine. The truth is, people who cheat don't just betray their partner. They betray their own character. And that's not something anyone can fix for them. They have to sit with that weight. I could see it written all over her face, the regret, the loneliness, the wish that she could rewind time. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. What surprised me most wasn't how broken she looked. It was how unshaken I felt. The version of me that would have been devastated to hear she regretted it, that version was gone. In his place was someone who had already grieved the relationship, already processed the lies, and already built something better. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. Because hating her would mean she still had that kind of power over me. And she didn't. Not anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't cold. I was free. And that scared her more than anger ever could. She asked if we could ever be friends. I said, No, I don't think so. Not because I was being cruel, but because healing doesn't mean dragging old pain into new spaces. It means knowing which doors need to stay closed. Some things don't deserve a second chance. Some people don't get to keep you in their orbit just because they're finally ready. She teared up when I stood to leave. She said she was happy I found someone good. I believed her. But it didn't move me. I had waited so long for her to care, for her to feel what I felt. And now that she did, I realized it no longer mattered. I had stopped waiting. Walking away from that coffee shop didn't feel like victory. It felt like finally laying something to rest. A quiet burial of everything that had once weighed me down. That night, Elena asked me how it went. I told her the truth. I told her I was glad I went, and even more glad it was over. She didn't press for details. She just said, "Closure is earned, not owed." I looked around my apartment, our space now, not mine alone, and realized how far I'd come. Not just in distance, but in identity. I was no longer the man whose life fell apart when someone else stopped loving him. I was the man who built something stronger after it happened. What she saw in me that day wasn't the man she left. It was the man who grew in her absence. The one who learned that real love doesn't demand your silence, your pride, or your self-respect. It simply meets you where you are, and grows with you. I never planned to see her again after that. But life has a way of bringing the past back, not to tempt you, but to test how far you've come. It happened one afternoon when Elena and I were out shopping. I didn't even notice her at first. It was her voice that caught me, familiar but distant, like hearing a song you once overplayed during a heartbreak. She stood frozen, a bag in her hand, pretending not to be startled. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I simply nodded politely and moved on. Elena noticed, of course. She didn't ask who the woman was. She didn't need to. She knew from my stillness, the faint sigh that escaped before I spoke again. That's the kind of understanding we had now, quiet, deep, and effortless. Later that night, we sat on the balcony with coffee. Elena finally asked, "Was that her?" I said yes. She nodded and said nothing else. She trusted me. Not because I earned it through grand gestures or constant proof, but because our relationship wasn't built on insecurity or fear. We knew each other's scars, and we didn't punish one another for having them. The truth is, seeing my ex like that didn't stir up anything. No rage. No heartbreak. Not even pity. Just perspective. A clear view of what I used to think was normal. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her smile barely held, it all showed me what happens when someone chooses temporary thrills over lasting loyalty. And what happens when you don't. I'd spent months rebuilding. Not to show anyone, not to flaunt a new life, but because I needed to know I could be whole again. I worked on my body, not to impress, but because I wanted to feel strong in my own skin. I revisited old hobbies I had abandoned, things that reminded me who I was before love made me forget. I reconnected with friends I had ignored while trying to save a marriage that only one of us was fighting for. And the more I invested in myself, the less I looked back. Regret had no place anymore. Closure had already been signed and sealed the day I chose not to return bitterness with bitterness. Elena and I weren't perfect. We had our disagreements, our off days, our growing pains. But we never weaponized each other's vulnerabilities. We argued without tearing down. We apologized without being forced. We healed in each other's presence, not because we were each other's saviors, but because we didn't expect the other person to fix what they didn't break. She once told me, "It's not about who hurt you. It's about what you do with the pain." I used to think moving on meant pretending it didn't happen. Now I knew better. Moving on meant accepting that it did happen, and choosing to live anyway. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering the smallest things. The way I used to rush home, hoping my presence would matter more than it did. The way I ignored the red flags because I wanted so badly for the vows to mean something. But those memories no longer held me hostage. They just reminded me of what I would never settle for again. A few weeks after running into her, my ex messaged me again. She asked if we could talk one last time. I hesitated, not because I cared, but because I knew conversations like that often came from guilt, not growth. Still, I agreed, more for me than for her. It wasn't closure I needed. It was confirmation that I didn't need anything from her anymore. We met at a quiet cafe. She looked nervous, hesitant, maybe even ashamed. She apologized again, but this time it felt more honest. Not because she hoped to fix anything, she knew that door was locked, but because she had finally accepted that she broke something she could never rebuild. She said she saw me and Elena at the store. Said she could tell we were happy. That she didn't expect me to land on my feet so well. I thanked her. Not sarcastically. Genuinely. Because her betrayal forced me to face everything I had avoided. It cracked me open, and while it hurt like hell, it also gave me a second chance at building the kind of life I deserved. She asked if part of me ever missed what we had. I didn't lie. I told her I missed who I thought we were. But not what we actually had. Because the truth is, I never really had her, not fully. I was just borrowing someone who had already checked out, hoping I could love enough for two. As I got up to leave, she reached out and said, "I'm happy for you." It sounded sincere, but it wasn't my responsibility to carry her regret. I nodded, said, "Take care," and walked out into a life I was proud of. That night, I told Elena everything. Not because I had to, but because transparency wasn't optional for us. It was foundational. She listened, held my hand, and didn't say, "I told you so." She just kissed my shoulder and said, "Thank you for being honest." In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't always look like revenge or dramatic comebacks. Sometimes it's as simple as telling the truth, sleeping peacefully, and waking up next to someone who values your presence. Everything I had gone through, the betrayal, the anger, the loneliness, had led me here. Not to prove a point. Not to show her what she lost. But to find what I was always worthy of: peace, respect, and love that doesn't demand I sacrifice my dignity to receive it. Months passed. The seasons changed. The pain that once lived in the back of my mind became a faded echo. Life didn't just go on, it blossomed. The difference now was simple. I no longer measured my worth by someone else's ability to stay. I measured it by my ability to rebuild, to rise, to choose myself in the quiet moments no one else could see. Elena and I moved in together. It wasn't some dramatic leap, just a natural progression. I never thought I'd love again, let alone trust someone with the broken pieces of me. But she never asked me to heal fast. She simply sat with me while I did. That kind of love doesn't rush. It listens. It waits. It stands still when you need to catch your breath. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable to anyone else, when I knew I had finally let it all go. We were cooking dinner, music playing low, her laughing at something I said. I looked at her, and nothing else existed. Not the past. Not the wounds. Just her. Just us. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. People often ask how you know when you've truly moved on. It's when their name no longer carries weight. When you can remember what happened without wishing it had ended differently. When you stop rehearsing the pain and start celebrating the strength it gave you. I don't hate my ex. I don't wish her harm. She made a choice, and I made mine. That's all it ever was. Choices. And I chose to let go. I chose not to carry bitterness into a new life that asked for honesty, not baggage. I chose to build something better, not to prove a point, but because I refused to let someone else's failure define my future. Sometimes people break you because they're already broken. And while it's not your job to fix them, it is your responsibility to not become them. I had every reason to become cynical, to close off, to treat love like a risk I'd never take again. But that would have been letting her win twice, first by cheating, then by changing the way I love. Instead, I got better. Quietly. Privately. Without spectacle. Not for revenge. For redemption. Mine. Elena and I were invited to a mutual friend's wedding. I almost said no. The guest list was broad, and I had no interest in being in the same room as my past. But Elena squeezed my hand and said, "We don't have to hide from anything anymore." She was right. We went. We danced. We laughed. And yes, she was there too. Across the room. Alone. Or maybe with someone, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I felt nothing. Not numbness. Not triumph. Just nothing. That's when I understood that healing had finished its work. After the wedding, someone I hadn't seen in years approached me. An old friend who'd known both of us during the marriage. He said, "I gotta say, I didn't think you'd come out of that mess better. But man, you look happier now than you ever did back then." I smiled and replied, "Because I am." You see, the worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the doubt it plants in you, about your worth, your judgment, your ability to trust again. But once you push through that fog, once you rebuild from the inside out, the world doesn't just feel different. You feel different in it. I started giving advice, not publicly, not online, but to friends, coworkers, people going through their own quiet heartbreaks. I didn't offer cliches. I just told the truth. That healing is brutal but beautiful. That closure doesn't come from them, it comes from you. That the person who betrayed you is not the final word in your story. One friend asked me, "If you could go back and stop the betrayal from happening, would you?" I thought about it. The sleepless nights. The pain. The confusion. The collapse of everything I thought was real. Then I said, "No. Because I would have stayed in a life that wasn't right for me. I would have missed this one." That's the paradox. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you clears the path for the best thing that ever could. The last time my ex reached out, it was a simple message. "I'm glad you're doing well." I read it. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of finality. Not every door needs to be slammed. Some just need to stay closed. And locked. For good. Love after betrayal doesn't look like grand gestures or epic speeches. It looks like someone learning to trust the mirror again. It looks like peace in your chest when you realize they don't have that hold on you anymore. It looks like laughing again. Sleeping through the night. Saying no without guilt. Saying yes without fear. That's what Elena gave me, not because she saved me, but because she gave me space to save myself. She loved the man who had been through fire, not the man who pretended he hadn't burned. And in return I gave her everything I never knew I could give again. So if you're there, sitting in the aftermath, heart in pieces, wondering if you'll ever be okay again, hear this, you will. Not all at once. Not easily. But completely. One boundary at a time. One step at a time. One truth at a time. Because sometimes the person who hurt you was just the crack that let the light in. And what comes next, that's yours to choose.